told by a number of people that before he was a partisan, before he was a farmer, he tried to go to sea. And some of the authors who write about him say, well, we can't find anything about it, so we don't think it happened. Some say he was shipwrecked. The story basically is recounted by, again, Lee, and I'm going to read Lee's account. One of the reasons I like Lee is Lee and, again, Marion were friends, so he probably get the story from Marion himself, or somebody very close. Lee writes, at the age of 16, he, meaning Marion, entered on board a vessel bound to the West Indies with a determination to fit himself out for a seafaring life. On its outward passage, the vessel was suddenly upset in a gale of wind when the crew took to their boats without water or provisions, it being impractical to save any of either. A dog jumped into the boat with the crew, and upon his flesh, that is the dog's, eaten raw, did the survivors of these unfortunate men subsist for 7 or 8 days, in which period several died of hunger. Among the few who escaped was young Marion. After reaching land, Marion relinquished his original plan of life and engaged in the labors of agriculture. To the best we know, he never went to sea again, and you don't have to guess why. As I said, some of the authors who write about Marion say, well, did this really occur? And some say, well, it did, and some say it didn't. There are different accounts. Some say the little boat reached land, and some say it was picked up at sea. Brody, in his account, says, and Brody's interesting. Brody writes basically the oral history of Williamsburg. There's not a lot of history to it, but it's interesting stuff because it's the collective memory of Williamsburg County. He says, everybody suspected there's something more to this. Maybe they went pirating or something, who knows. But a number of years ago, I got a book by Ronald Ridwell, I believe, on the history of Georgetown, which was interesting because in that history, he relates this story. He's talking about how Georgetown was becoming very important for navigation and for going to sea and all that sort of stuff. And he relates how that life at sea was dangerous. Ships sunk. He says another Georgetown vessel, the brigantine Grampus, suffered a similar fate. That is, it sunk in a storm. In October of 1750, but with much more serious consequences for those on board. The Gazette recorded the episode, and it's quoted. The brigantine Grampus, being on an outward bound voyage, overstat on the 7th instant, the 7th of October that is, captain and passengers and crew, 12 in number, took to their boat and were 7 days in her without provisions or water, in which time 3 of them died, and the rest were taken up just as they had reached the Bahamas on the 15th, and brought in here, Charlestown, by Captain Dulby, who arrived last week from Providence. Does it sound like the same story? Sound like the same story to me. Apparently, according to Brody, Marion would never talk about this incident in his life, but it was well known to other people, and the reason it was well known was in the newspaper. I think the sea story is important for a number of reasons. One, a disaster of that sort marks a person. When you survive something like that, you've looked at death, you've stared death in the eye, and you've come to grips with it. And one of the things we know about Marion as life went on was he was a cool character. He did not fear death. And I would submit that began when he went to sea. And it's really the beginning of Marion the legend, because people started to circulate stories about him going to sea and surviving. It's a remarkable incident. When Weems writes his story about Marion, he suggests something really quite sinister, which today you're not going to catch. And that is when Weems tells the account, he elaborates the story, but he says that the boat was not upset by a storm, but it was upset by a whale, struck by a whale and sunk. Now, Weems writes in 1824. In 1821, just 3 years before, there is the episode of the Essex. Does anybody know what the Essex is? Yeah. nasty story.
Yes.
The Essex was a whale ship out of Massachusetts. Over on the African coast. It's struck by a whale. It sinks. It sinks so rapidly that the men are already in the boats, and they don't have any provisions. The story of the Essex is still told in law schools and still studied because the men turned to cannibalism. The question is, do you have the right to eat another person to survive? Right. This is what, when Weems was saying the boat was struck by a whale in 1824, that is the image that people reading that book would think about, because the Essex had occurred in 1821. What happened in that voyage? I have no idea. According to all accounts, Marion would not talk about it. Whether anything nasty happened or people just thought about it, it was a bad experience. It was undoubtedly a bad experience. But it made him the type of person who really had the ability to go forward and not worry about what was going on. It also probably gave him what we know today is called survivor complex or survivor guilt. And that is frequently when people survive a very nasty event, they have this desire that they have to make something important in their life. Why did I survive and other people didn't? And they're impelled to go forward and to do good things, which is exactly what Marion did. And I would just say one other thing, because I'm kind of getting high saying, about his naval career. Considering his family, considering their wealth, he would not have gone to sea as an able-bodied seaman. That was the lowest of the low, to be an able-bodied seaman. The only thing that made sense was that because of the merchants involved in his family, because of the wealth, because of the need to have an economic circle supported by the family, if he went to sea, he would have gone to sea with the intent to become a master, a ship's captain. If that was the intent, they would have taught him navigation. And I think that is also a key to his future character, because if you know navigation, you can find things. Outside is the Mouzon map. Mouzon was a friend of Francis Marion. There is some thought that he helped Mouzon make that map. No doubt Marion knew a lot about South Carolina and how to get around. Interestingly enough, in Symp's works, Symp talks to a lot of the veterans, and they describe how Marion would conduct a raid. His favorite time was to leave at night. The favorite nights he liked to leave on had no moons. George went back and checked that. Big raids are on moonless nights. What happens on moonless nights? The stars are out bright. The people who worked with him said he liked to travel in a straight line. He never used roads. Well, you know what? If you're a navigator, and you have the stars, you have a good map, you can find anything. And his uncanny ability to find anything, I believe, is linked to the fact that he went to sea, he learned how to navigate. And this was something that's mystical to the man who served with him, who didn't have a clue about navigation. And it's something he wouldn't tell people because he doesn't want to spoil the myth. Because in some respects, one of the reasons we don't know a lot about Marion is he didn't want us to know a lot. He would refuse to sit for his portrait. Other people would have paid for it. He wouldn't do it. And he was not the type of guy who was going to share his secrets with people. So some of that mystique is intentional. Commanders frequently, even today, they would keep a little bit of mystique so the guys respect them. And yet, in spite of that, when we see him as a human being, we see that he's best man at a wedding, pallbearer, he meets social responsibilities, he's a mason, he attends family events, he bounces kids on his knee. The fellow who did the portrait, not the portrait, the Marion crossing, Marion with the sweet potato, said he remembered Marion's features because he remembered sitting on the general's knee. Clearly, this is not a guy who doesn't like people. He likes people. And although some folks have said that he was a very somber man, and it's reported that way, and people who deal with him during the war, I would point out to you that during the war, there was no reason for him not to be somber. Keep in mind what was going on. His family had mostly died off. He had broken ankle, in pain physically. He was unable to get around, to do the things he wanted to do. He was hunted by the British. He had a price on his head. American Army and the Lincoln had been destroyed. Washington's, not General Washington, but Colonel Washington's horse had been destroyed. The cavalry troop had been destroyed. There was the massacre by Talon. His comrade in arms, the men he had served with, the man taking the oath of allegiance to Great Britain. Henry Middleton, former president of the Continental Congress, took the oath of allegiance. The world was collapsing around him. Even Symp directly took the oath of allegiance. His friends had turned against him. We know about the story of Gabriel, who was murdered, that Gabriel saw a friend of his uncle there. The friend of the uncle didn't help him. We know his brother-in-law tried to turn him over to the British. His favorite nephew, who was very close to him, was murdered. He doesn't really have a lot to be happy about. His property was seized by the British. He goes to, under great danger to himself, he goes north to offer his services to Gates. He's primarily ignored and almost laughed out of the army because people with him look so ragged and poor. He doesn't look very military. He's sent out to work with the militia. Well, he's a regular officer. He doesn't work for the militia. And you read his accounts, he has a very low opinion of the militia. He says they're not worth much of anything. They don't do much of anything. And yet he's sent really to do this rather degrading task for a professional officer. He writes to Gates. Gates doesn't respond to him. Because of the raids he conducts, the neighborhoods that he's working in are put to the fire and sword by the British. He has no money. He rescues 150 prisoners. Great thing. And 2 of them join him. 70 insist upon marching to Charlestown to become prisoners of war. And the rest just disappear and go home. The war's over. We're united with him. He offers to rescue the Continental officers at April's Point. And they say, no thanks, we're happy here. So he's been sleeping on the ground for a year by the time Harry Lee shows up. No tent, no blanket, no air mattress, no deep woods off, no showers. That must have been bad. Rutledge, who's a very knowledgeable man, sends him 2 shirts. He can't send him any gunpowder, but he sends him 2 shirts. What we know he did have, though, because James tells us they all had what I call the soldier's companion. They all had lice. So, and he'd been living on sweet potatoes and bad water with vinegar for all this time. He was not having a good time of it. If he seemed a little glum, he had every right to be a little glum. So I don't think he was a moody man. And Johnson, in his reminiscences of the war, say that actually he had a good sense of humor and a sharp wit. He was buzzing up. And clearly after the war, he wasn't buzzing up. So we should not judge him by when we see him in the greatest stressful time of his life, a time where, quite frankly, under today's theories of modern warfare, he should be approaching battle fatigue, because you can't be in constant combat for hours, for months and months and months as he was, with no chance to rest and relax. So, before I could cook, Marion was a human being like all of us. He had his ups and his downs, his good days, his bad days. He probably had poison ivy as a kid. There are lots of things we can relate to him about. The point, I think, is best summed up again by Lee. And let me just read the last account of Lee and get out of your hair. Lee writes, General Marion was in stature, small size, thin as well as low. His visage was not pleasing, his manners not captivating. He was reserved and silent, entering into conversation only when necessary, and then with modesty and good sense. He possessed a strong mind, proved by his own reflections and observation, not by books and travel. His dress, like his address, was plain, regarding comfort and decency only. He was sedulous and constant in his attention to the duties of his station, to which every other consideration yielded. Even the charms of the fair, like the luxuries of the table and the allurements of wealth, seemed to be lost upon him. The procurement of substance for his men, and the contrivance of annoyance to his enemy engrossed his entire mind. He was virtuous all over. Never, even in manner, much less in reality, did he trench upon right. Beloved by his friends and respected by his enemies, he exhibited a luminous example of the beneficial effects to be produced by an individual who, with only a small means at his command, possessed a virtuous heart, a strong head, and a mind devoted to the common good. He died in February 1795, leaving behind him an indisputable title to the first rank among patriots and soldiers of our revolution.
I want to thank you. You packed a lot of information into that. And we sign every day in these parks. We get to hear a Boston accent. Thank you. All right. Well, we've just about made it on time. It's just after 5:30. And we need George wants to say a few words.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank Brian for doing my job for me here and doing a very good job. And we can use anybody's help that's staying around. Remember, if you got history clothes in the car, you're welcome to put them on. If you want a place to sit so we don't move you with your chair, there are benches down the hallway out here, chairs out there. Once the ladies get the tables covered, you're welcome to come back and claim your seat and chat, do whatever. The food out in the middle is for tonight. You will get killed if you Would the other presenters please stand up? Karen MacNutt.
Nikki just gave you whistle.
Okay. Dr. Swager, you will be hearing from later. And then the members of the Murals Committee, they're the ones who really bring it all together. Would they please stand up, the Murals and Symposium Committee? Don't be back. And one of our presenters just came in, Nikki Sackerson, and she's the man back there with the hat on.
What did I do now?
She's writing a book. She was hoping to have it here for that we would be the first ones to have an opportunity to purchase it. Afterwards, we'll take a short break after dinner, and Bob Swager has a list so you can sign your name on the list if you want to get the book. It's really for the ladies as well as the men, because she identifies roughly 400 women who fought as men in the American Revolution and what they did. So that's sort of neat. And don't forget Nell Black and the beautiful quilt that we have out there. And the members of the quilt committee, I know we got at least one or two of them here.
Carolyn and
Please stand up and let the folks. Once again, a masterpiece from the And then we had our own reporter from the Mankind, Brian Jarvis, was here so that he could see what war in the backcountry was really about. And he was our MC. And our MC tonight will be the incomparable, the world-famous author, what else?
I'm going to stay home
TV
next year.
personality, Dr. Christine Swager.
Next year I'm going to stay home. For those of you who don't live in Clarendon County, you have a real treat. Those of us who live in this area know that we have among us a treasure, a South Carolina treasure, in the person of Linzy and Karen Washington. They perform in concert. They've appeared on television, on film for tourism. they just have a marvelous gift. Now, Linzy was a professional musician in New York, but his family in Somerton needed him, and so he came back to Somerton. Can you imagine the culture shock from New York to Somerton? And he met and married a local music teacher who teaches in the Clarendon County schools. The wonderful thing about their performances is you see no drums, no brass, no electric equipment behind. And so please enjoy the magnificent voices of Linzy and Karen, the Washingtons.
Oh Lord, I've done what you told me to do. Oh Lord, I've done what you told me to do. Oh Lord, I've done what you told me to do. In that morning, oh my Lord, in that morning, oh my Lord, in that morning when the Lord says, hurry. Lord, into that morning, oh my Lord, into that morning when the Lord says, hurry. Oh, gambler, you can't get on to the train. Oh, gambler, you can't get on to this train. Oh, gambler, you can't get on to this train. Into that morning, oh my Lord, into that morning, oh my Lord, into that morning when the Lord says, hurry. In that morning, oh my Lord, into that morning, oh my Lord, into that morning when the Lord says, hurry. Oh, sister, you can't get on to this train. Oh, sister, you can't get on to this train. Oh, sister, you can't get on to this train. Into that morning, oh my Lord, into that morning, oh my Lord, into that morning when the Lord says, hurry. That morning, oh my Lord, into that morning, oh my Lord, into that morning when the Lord says, hurry. I got shoes, you got shoes, all of God's children got shoes. When I get to heaven, gonna put on my shoes. I'm gonna walk all over God's heaven, heaven. Everybody talk about a heaven, ain't a going near heaven. Heaven. I'm gonna walk all over God's heaven. Now I got a robe, you got a robe, all of God's children got a robe. When I get to heaven, gonna put on my robe. I'm gonna walk all over God's heaven, heaven. Everybody talk about a heaven, ain't a going near heaven, heaven. I'm gonna walk all over God's heaven. Now I got a crown, you got a crown, all of God's children got a crown. When I get to heaven, gonna put on my crown. I'm gonna walk all over God's heaven, heaven. Everybody talk about a heaven, ain't a going near heaven, heaven. I'm gonna walk all over God's heaven. Way in the water, way in trouble. The water, wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God is gonna trouble the water. You see that pole star dressed in white. God is gonna trouble the water. Oh, we looking like the children of the Israelite. God is gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God is gonna trouble the water. You see that pole star dressed in red. God is gonna trouble the water. Oh, we looking like the band that Moses led. God is gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God is gonna trouble the water. And you don't believe I've been redeemed. God is gonna trouble the water. Come on and follow me down the whole Jordan stream. God is gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God is gonna trouble the water. Now God is gonna trouble the water. Joshua did the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua did the battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down. Joshua did the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua did the battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down.
You been talking about the king of Gideon.
You've been talking about the men of Saul.
And there's none like good old Joshua.
At the battle of Jericho, oh my Lord, Joshua did the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua did the battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down.
You been talking about the king of Gideon.
You've been talking about the men of Saul.
And there's none like good old Joshua.
At the battle of Jericho, oh my Lord, Joshua did the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua did the battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down.